do you support more children going back to primary school from tomorrow?
No, we think tomorrow is too soon, and we have made that argument very, very clearly for a number of weeks now, ever since Boris Johnson made his announcement on the 10th of May. We do think that schools are really important. We know that vulnerable children need to get back into school, and we do know that children need school for socialisation, for physical health and mental health. So we're not making the call that schools should not reopen tomorrow lightly. We're doing it because we do not believe the government's own tests have been met. And it is very complex and difficult to open schools and to do so safely, particularly with the guidelines that the government has produced.
You say there about and I take your point about the difficulty in socially distancing in schools, but you make the point there about how you don't take this decision lightly, because clearly there are negative consequences to children being off school. On last week's programme, Sir Michael Wilshaw, the former head of Bousted, saying that we risk a lost generation of youngsters. Are you worried that you're not on the side of those pupils who could be really put back by spending months out of the classroom?
Well, we are on the side of those pupils, and my members, teachers and support staff have really worked non-stop to try to contact those children, to try and get the most vulnerable children into school, to provide learning at home. I mean, teachers and support staff and leaders have done everything they can in this pandemic to try to connect with those children, particularly the most vulnerable children. But actually, you know, they've got places in schools, and many of them are not taking them up because the parents are scared about the virus and about bringing the virus back home. So there's a huge thing to do also about public confidence and parental confidence that it is safe to get your children back to school. And the government simply did not give enough time to plan. Let me just give you one piece of information. The government's plans on reopening schools since they were first produced on the 12th of May have been changed 41 times. And that's because they've constantly had to be revised as things they've forgotten, things they didn't know, things they got wrong have been added in. That's hugely added to the stress of school leaders and teachers, because we have a government simply who they think is just making it up as it goes along.
You are talking about the fact that schools can only go back when it's safe to do so. But if you look at the science, it does indicate that children are less likely to get COVID-19 and also less likely to pass it on. A UCL study, for example, saying they're half as likely to catch it as adults. The Italian town of Bousted tested 86% of their population, didn't find a single child under 10 with COVID. And then also studies in the Netherlands, for example, suggesting that by far coronavirus is spread between adults or from adults to children. So if we're talking about the science, then doesn't the science indicate that younger children should be some of the first people to be going back to school?
Well, we know that. Well, I absolutely agree with you. The science says that children do not get the COVID. They might get infected, but they don't get the disease. But actually, the government itself, its own sage advisors, and Professor Peter Hornby, I'm going to get his title right, who is on the SAGE committee and is chair of the government's new and emergency respiratory virus threats advisory group. He said yesterday that the government had a poor handle. It didn't know to what extent and whether children transmit the virus. So that's the government's own advisor in charge of its committee on respiratory diseases. And we are asking teachers and support staff, because the government's given up on social distancing in schools. It talks about cohort distancing. So there's 15 children in a class with a teacher for 5 or 6 hours a day. Those children live in families who from tomorrow will be able to go out and socialise with 6 other people. We're asking them, without PPE and without social distancing, to go into schools at a time when the rate of infection is still the 5th highest incidence in the world, and at a time when there is not a fully functioning test, contact, trace and isolate system in place. Now, we are not saying because you can't eliminate risk that schools should never be open, but we do agree with Professor Hornby and with Independent SAGE, who say if you keep the lockdown measures in place for 2 more weeks and open schools on June the 15th, then the rate of infection in children will have halved, and therefore their ability to pass on the virus will have halved. We think that is safer, we think that is sensible, we think that's rational, and we think that's responsible.
Do you think, in that case, that if you are calling for the opening of schools to be delayed a little bit longer, do you think that really the summer holiday should be cancelled to allow children to catch up?
We think that there should be activities for children in the summer, but with teachers, you see, the thing is this notion amongst the media that schools are being closed. That's not been the case. Schools have been open for key workers and vulnerable children, and in addition,
I accept that schools have been open, but the question is specifically, should the
yeah,
summer holiday be cancelled to allow
no,
children to catch up who've been out of school for months?
no, the summer holiday shouldn't be cancelled because teachers have been working flat out to provide education for children at home. So what should happen is, and we do support this, to have clubs and activities on a volunteer basis for those children to meet together to socialise. Because what those children have to do, we don't think the emphasis should be on catch up. Many of those children will need to re-socialise, re-engage with learning and a love of learning, and being involved in creative activities which enable them to become part of a wider society again and have the desire to learn again. We think that because the point is this, education is not going to get back to normal, not just for a week, but for a long time yet. And we have to build a new national plan for education at school for part of the time and at home for part of the time. And the government needs to make sure that vulnerable children have internet access. It needs a national plan for distance and blended learning. And at the moment, all this emphasis on schools, who will not be able to open to all pupils in any time soon, is not taking into account what is really needed.
I absolutely accept that teachers have been working very hard to provide online lessons. Some teachers have been going to school to provide education for key workers, children and vulnerable children. But at the same time, many people have been working flat out throughout the coronavirus pandemic. Children have been off school for months on end. We already are hearing concerning stories about fears that some of the progress for disadvantaged children is going to be wiped out. Some people listening to you saying that the school holidays shouldn't be cancelled will be thinking, why on earth not?
Well, I think I've answered that question already. Teachers work the most unpaid overtime of any profession. Many are exhausted already and they need a holiday to recover. And the Secretary of State himself has said that in the House of Commons. It's one of the few things that I agree with Gavin Williamson on, that teachers should not be. But we do support activities for children over the summer holidays. And I think I've given a full answer about what we do support.
Okay.
The fact of the matter is teachers have been working. They've been working extremely hard. Many teachers have been working harder, even harder than they do normally.
Now, just to finish, now, of course, you've been involved in the trade union movement for many years, so I'm assuming that you had some dealings with Dominic Cummings when he was working in the Department for Education. From your knowledge of him, are you surprised by Boris Johnson's decision to stand by him? He's clearly an integral part of the Downing Street machine.
Well, I don't think I'd be surprised by anything that Boris Johnson did. It's clear that Dominic Cummings is essential to the Downing Street machine, and I think that Boris Johnson has just shown his complete weakness. He's alienated his own party. He's trashed the trust of the public by publicly supporting and defending to the hilt someone who clearly broke the lockdown rules and clearly behaved in a reckless way. My knowledge of Dominic Cummings is that goes to